For the past 15 years, I've taught online classes to graduate students who work in Yellowstone, Yosemite, the Grand Canyon, on the Big Island in Hawaii, the Kenai Peninsula in Alaska, and along the Florida coast. They work in zoos, science centers, and history museums. They work at all the cool places, and they want their walks, talks, exhibits, special events, and gallery tours to expand your mind, stir your heart, and fire your imagination. Many of my students work at sites that straddle difficult history. I define difficult history as something happened, and we have different and competing notions about what it means. I define places of difficult history as sites where we learn about what happened to real people and confront events that we would rather avoid, that make us uncomfortable, and that nudge us toward grief. I mentioned that my students work at the coolest places doing the coolest things. They study with me not because I've got it all figured out, but because I hold out a compelling vision. If you want to build a just and sustainable world, let's do it. But first, we have to learn to be conveners and facilitators. We have to get good at having conversations about things that divide us. And we have to take advantage of the places where we work and use them as catalysts to grieve, heal, and reconcile. Let me give you an example. The events of the Vietnam War and our differing interpretation of the events divided us as a nation. When the soldiers returned, they faced a society that was ambivalent to their service and hostile to the fallout from the war. When we decided to commemorate those who served and died, even the design of the memorial was controversial. Etched in granite are the names of more than 55,000 American soldiers who died in a war that we lost. What the memorial shows us is the power of place. The memorial grounds are not the fields of Vietnam where the soldiers died, but for those who remember the war, those born after the war, and those born tomorrow. The memorial is a place to grieve difficult history. And these places are so necessary in our society because, frankly, we suck at grief. It's true. We're good at responding to loss. We hold candlelight vigils, leave flowers, stage protests, and like Facebook posts. But we tend to stop short in the grief process, especially as it relates to societal loss. And this is tragic, because if we don't grieve, we can't heal. If we stop short, we cannot get to reconciliation. South Africa may be the best example of a country that's gone through a grief process together. Following the breakdown of apartheid, South Africa adopted a 4-part truth-telling framework to foster understanding, accountability, and healing. The first part of the truth-telling framework is evidence-based truth. This requires us to piece together all the facts to figure out what happened. The second part is personal truth. This is where you share your experiences and listen to the experiences of others. The third part is societal truth, and this is where it gets messy, because we have to hold all the different and competing points of view together, which can and does create tension. But by saying yes and to your truth and your truth and your truth, individual narratives are woven together into group narrative truth, and empathy emerges in the system. The fourth part is reconciliatory truth. This is where we restore the dignity to victims without dehumanizing perpetrators. This is where we heal the divides and do everything we can to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. So what does the Vietnam Memorial get right? The memorial conveys evidence-based truth. You see the name of every soldier who died. It also conveys something of the enormity of the loss. The memorial elicits personal truth. Jim Gillum is a Vietnam veteran who lives in Atlanta. In an interview, he said, "I look at it now and see how people have backed away from being antagonistic and disrespectful toward Vietnam veterans. It took me years to go back to Vietnam, and it took me years to go to the Vietnam Wall and find my friends' names. I just didn't want to do it. Now, I go to the wall every year." The Vietnam Memorial helps us think about all the different stories that interact to form societal truth. In 1998, I interviewed visitors to the National Mall. I spoke with a woman from Alaska who had just attended an interpretive program at the Lincoln Memorial. She said, "I came to DC to find my second cousin's name on the wall. It's wonderful to live in a country that honors Lincoln and honors my second cousin." But a memorial can only do so much. And as a society, we're still working on what reconciliatory truth looks like in this case. Yes, we have reconciled the fact that the war was a big mistake. Yes, we have reconciled the fact that we treated the returning soldiers horribly. And yes, we have honored the sacrifice of more than 55,000 Americans who died. But we have yet to reconcile that overall, 3 to 4 million people lost their lives in the conflict. And there are Vietnamese Americans who came to this country as refugees, who feel that their experiences have been ignored and their voices have been silenced. I have a passion for places of difficult history because I have felt their power on a personal level. My own grief journey began on a weekend trip to the family farm when I buttoned up my 4.5-year-old daughter Isla's red trench coat, sent her outside to play. I didn't realize that my husband Dean had sent her inside because she had been trying to go down to the other end of the shooting range. I didn't tell Dean that I sent her back out. Isla went and hid behind the target, and Dean didn't see her. You can map the 4-part truth-telling framework on top of our grief. Fact, the accident was 100% preventable, but we don't get a do-over. Our personal truth is a testimony to the power of unconditional love. Dean did not blame me, and I didn't blame him. And by the grace of God, we are still together. We intersected societal truth in so many ways, some painful. But one of the things that people said to us is that there is nothing worse than losing a child. Even in my grief, I sensed that that was not true. We still had a home, a family, a community, a nation. We were not pawns of war, refugees, slaves, or victims of genocide. For people in these situations, losing a child or even multiple family members may be just one layer of the loss they have to endure. I think we need to look through the lens of an expanded worldview and embrace a larger version of societal truth. And by the way, we still go to the family farm because we have found that our healing and reconciliation is tied to place, and that it's an ongoing process for us to stay open to grief. Now think about your own grief journey. Very likely there's a place where loss has touched your life deeply. But responding to loss is not the same as following the grief journey all the way through. Now picture yourself in the context of the larger society. My students and I talk about this all the time. How can we engage audiences in difficult history at the societal level? We keep coming back to the fact that evidence matters, that personal truth is diverse and nuanced, that societal truth is a weaving together of everyone's stories, and that we have to keep reconciliation firmly in our sights. So now, as citizens of this country, I challenge you to engage difficult history. The next time you go to Kansas, go to Brown v. Board of Education National Historic Site and think about the Supreme Court ruling that separate isn't equal. And consider what it means that we have highly segregated school districts today. The next time you're anywhere between Georgia and Oklahoma, go to the Trail of Tears and learn about one chapter in the history of the removal of Native Americans from their homelands. The next time you're in New York, go to the 9/11 Memorial. Think about the loss of life, but also imagine how your life might have changed on that day if you were Muslim American. And if you can't make any of those trips, go to some place local. If you're from St. Louis, go downtown to the old courthouse where slaves were bought and sold on the steps. Go to places of difficult history, whether the events happened 100 years ago or yesterday. Make connections between then and now. Trace the ripple effect of past events into the present. Overlay the truth-telling framework on your grief. Do this because only if we own societal grief can we heal and reconcile the difficult history of America. Thank you.